Hi, I'm T1J. Follow me on Twitter. So I've talked about this a bunch of times in videos and also on social media, but I thought I'd make a video about this specifically. This is a really good video for me given what I've been talking about a lot lately because I think it perfectly encapsulates how fucking stupid internet discourse is right now. Like how there's absolutely no attempt whatsoever to honestly engage each other or to understand opposing points of view and possibly reach common ground. It's almost like we intentionally go out of our way to avoid being diplomatic. And I chose this particular subject because it pretty equally involves people being obnoxious on both sides of the coin. So sometimes people say that white people can't be the victims of racism, or even more unsettlingly that black people can't be racist. In my experience, when I see this suggested to white people, their responses can range from, okay, if you say so, to, fuck you, white people are the only true oppressed class in this country. Okay, so I've said this before, but saying that white people can experience racism or that black people can't be racist is doublespeak. Doublespeak is when you talk in a way that deliberately obscures the meanings of words. Now, I know racism seems like a simple enough topic, but it's actually pretty complicated. This probably has something to do with the fact that it's based on race, which isn't a thing. How race and racism is defined legally may not completely fall in line with how it's defined through a social lens. But most terms that we use in our everyday life have dictionary definitions that represent how they're most commonly used by ordinary people. And the definition of racism in that context is prejudice, discrimination, or mistreatment of people based on their race. And according to this definition, obviously black people can be racist. I went to high school with this black girl that hated white people, like she literally didn't want to touch them. She was racist. But the problem is, people who say that black people can't be racist aren't using this definition of racism. Like I said before, racism is a complicated subject. It's studied by sociologists, economists, historians, psychologists, and more. The prevailing sociological idea of racism involves prejudices and acts which result in advantages for a particular dominant social group. In this case, white people. So using this definition, black people can't be racist because they're the disadvantaged group. And of course, that's the definition that's being used here. But why particularly pick the sociological definition? Why not the legal definition or the dictionary definition for that matter? Or if you're going to use that definition, why not explain that there are multiple contexts that we can talk about racism and you're choosing one instead of pretending that it's the only definition? You want to know my theory? Just look at how it sounds. Black people can't be racist. It's provocative. It pisses people off. It's confusing, but it's biting. And my guess is that this was done on purpose, at least initially, because these people know the dictionary definition of racism. They know what most people think of when they hear the word racism. There's no way that they grew up in America and learned English and don't know that. In order to really drive the point home about systemic racism in America, we're gonna try to change the popular definition of racism without telling anyone. And by doing so, subtly imply that race-based prejudice against white people doesn't even exist. Which, of course, we know it does, but nuance makes our point weaker. Ironically, using doublespeak probably does a whole lot more in terms of weakening your argument. A lot of times you hear people say, black people can be prejudiced, but not racist. That's literally incoherent. Racism is prejudice. That's like saying, this is a fruit, but not an orange. It's merely the deliberate distortion of the meanings of words. Doublespeak. Don't do that. So when the more combative white listeners hear something like white people can't experience racism, they often respond with anger and confusion because they're using the dictionary definition and they feel like they're being antagonized. For many of these people, they just hear the one sentence and that's enough for them. They immediately go on like a 19-minute rant accusing people of race baiting, and they pull up a bunch of videos of black people doing crazy shit in order to prove that black people can be racist. Some of them will go so far as to say black people are more racist than everybody else because finding videos of crazy black people apparently proves that somehow. A strategy that I've been using personally lately is that if someone says something that sounds outrageous to me, I'm going to press for more information. I'm going to ask them to elaborate because I don't expect to agree with everyone, but I think that most people aren't lunatics. The statement, black people can't be racist, is too absurd for normal people to actually believe that. So there must be more to it. But of course, that's the problem. Cynicism is rampant in today's discourse. I think we actively seek out these controversial sounding views that we can take out of context and make our own views seem so rational by comparison. And then we tell our friends and all our followers, you know, so-and-so said that black people can't be racist. Aren't they stupid? And then this starts the noisy train of ideological division on the internet. But of course, as we learn concerned when people say that white people don't experience racism, what they mean is that white people don't experience systemic or institutionalized racism. And some people neglect to clarify this, which they should. But at the same time, a lot of people will explain this to you if you ask them. And a lot of people have made videos and articles explaining this. And many people, maybe even most people, agree with this, which you should because it's true. And really, it's the real issue here. It's the thing we're trying to talk about. Yeah, my high school acquaintance didn't want to touch white people, but that's completely irrelevant compared to the fact that she's more likely to be discriminated in the workplace or incarcerated. And for some people, even after they have it explained, they basically use a reverse form of the same flawed argument that caused the confusion in the first place. They say, like, look right here on the dictionary. It doesn't say anything about power or institutions. This is what racism is. And then they go on a 19-minute rant about race baiting and link to like 10 articles of black people doing crazy shit. Now, if we were starting this conversation at square one, I think the dictionary definition is a good launching point. But once the context has been explained to you, you don't get to remove it because it makes you uncomfortable or whatever. For the third time, racism is a complex topic. You don't get to say that the definition that you personally like is the one true definition, just like they don't get to say that either. One of the most annoying things ever is when someone disputes your argument on the basis of semantics. No, don't do that. Now that you know what the person's argument is, respond to that. Because at the end of the day, we shouldn't be spending so much time discussing what the definition of racism is. Just get to the fucking point. And then of course, there are people who just straight up disagree with the notion that systemic racism exists at all. And if this is you, I don't know where you've been, fam. I know you can find tons of videos on YouTube of black people saying crazy shit like you can do with any race, but it's quite demonstrable that racial minorities, particularly black people in America, are disadvantaged in almost every way, socially, economically, and legally. This is not about pursuing victimhood or being racially divisive. This is just saying a thing that's provably true. And people that are unwilling to believe things for which there's an overwhelming amount of statistical and documented evidence are the types of people that we just have to stop wasting time on. Disagreeing with a point of view is one thing, but disagreeing with a proven fact is just like, you're too far behind, man. We're gonna have to leave. You can catch up later. Anyway, my main point is we have to learn to communicate in an honest and thoughtful way. We should provide the necessary context for our arguments and not use confusing language. And once we know that context, we should respect it and not distort people's views in order to make them easier to attack. That's just me though. Thank you for watching this video. Check out this other video made about racism and colorblindness. I want to give a shout out to all of the new subscribers. How you doing? Be honest, be assertive, be kind, be open-minded. If you agree with that, can I see a Heiko in the comments? And subscribe if you like my hair. Thank you once again for watching my video. For those that don't know, I'm a full-time YouTube creator, and the only way that I'm able to do that is through your support, and a large portion of that support comes through Patreon. Now, Patreon is a crowdfunding site for people like me with ongoing creative projects. It's kind of like an online tip jar where you can set it up to donate just a couple bucks every time I make a new video. So if you find any value in my channel or my videos, or if you just want to support me, please consider signing up for Patreon. That would be super amazing and totally appreciated. But even if you don't feel like it, or if you can't, that's fine too. I just thank you for watching.